You may have at some point heard a theist say that for you to say that God doesn't exist, definitively, you need to know everything that there is to know. Now this is false because, if you're talking about an omniscient God, this is false because the omniscient God breaks the fundamental laws of our universe. That means that we can just discount him. Now, if you want to say that he exists in a separate dimension or outside of our own reality, and he's got his own set of laws, and so our laws don't apply to him, then how the hell did he create laws that don't apply to him? That doesn't make sense. How could he manipulate a universe with laws that don't apply to him? It doesn't make sense. Another thing is that we created God as an idea, just like we created unicorns. So to say that God exists in some sort of dimension that we cannot detect or find, first of all, that's a paradox in itself, because it's an unfalsifiable hypothesis. For you to say, you need to keep an open mind to this because you can't prove that it doesn't exist. There's nothing here for you to prove that there's nothing there. So that doesn't make any sense. To say that we should consider your idea because we can't disprove it doesn't make any sense. You can't disprove that a purple unicorn stuck its rectum outside of its own dimension and farted our universe into existence and then just popped back into its own dimension. You can't prove that because its dimension is separate from ours. You can't find that dimension and disprove it. But you can say that it's ridiculous for that unicorn to ever exist in that hypothesis because we created it. We came up with it mentally. The same is true for God. We came up with the concept of a deity. So to say that a deity created the universe doesn't make sense. Unless you're on some hallucinogenic drugs, then maybe it might make sense to you. There are also several paradoxes that God creates by being omniscient. One is the free will thing. If you believe that we have free will, that we can control our own actions, and you believe that God can control everything, that those two things conflict right there. Either we can control our own actions to the extent that we can control our own bodies, or God controls our actions and we don't. Now, if God controls our actions, that means that every sin that we've ever committed is the result of God. God gave us the ability to sin. He knew when he created us that we would sin, and he knew that that would make us go to hell. With that in mind, that means that God cannot forgive, because he knew when he created you with the intention for you to sin, with the intention to go to hell. So there's no way he can forgive you, unless he's just paradox-proof, and that's a paradox in itself. Now, another thing is the whole idea that God created the universe. Many people will invoke the complexity argument in saying that, this universe is so complex that it must have been created by a deity. Well, I find it to be the other way around. This universe is far too complex for something like a deity to have created. For something like a deity, the idea of a flawless deity, that's a paradox in itself. Creating something with flaws like a universe, I don't quite know how that makes sense. I could understand how something that's flawed could create something that's flawless, because it could go through its flaws and find out every single one of them. It could, through trial and error, figure out the definitive right way to do something. But if you already know the definitive right way to do something, how can you just make something wrong? It doesn't make any sense. So, it is perfectly reasonable for you to say that an omniscient God, the God that exists in the Bible, or that is proposed in the Bible, doesn't exist. Because it breaks the laws of our universe. Now, to say that no God exists is wrong, because as far as we know, something out there could have capabilities that might classify it as a god. Some nebula could, bring about charges within it in a way due to its molecules or chemical composition or whatever that could cause it to act like a big brain. And that big brain could cause, electromagnetic radiation or an electromagnetic field that could manipulate the things around it in a way that make it seem like a deity. Now, in that sense, you can consider that thing to be a god, but then your definition of God is changed. So, if you're talking about a God that created the universe, a God that's omniscient, or a God that's flawless, All three of those can easily be disproven without knowing anything about the universe other than physics. If you know about physics, if you know about paradoxes, then you can quite easily disprove this thing. Because it doesn't make any sense. It's like, and there's even less paradoxes involved if I were to say that I created the universe. Because the only paradox there is that I'm only in existence after the universe has been created. Whereas with God, if God created the universe, that means that there are at least two paradoxes of possibilities. That God created himself or has always been. So, it makes more sense for me to say that I created the universe than to say that God created the universe. At least I exist. We can prove that I exist. There's far more evidence to prove that I exist than to God. And if you're going to say that the Bible is good evidence for God's existence, then you also need to say that the Dr. Seuss book about the Grinch, it's by Dr. Seuss, right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is good proof that the Grinch really exists. And to me, the Bible being evidence for God, that's just as watertight as, or airtight, as the Grinch having its existence proved by the book about the Grinch.